Hey, love, back to hear more about hell? If there's more to hear. Not really, no further experiences. I have been thinking, though. What about? About harm. Or maybe retribution would be more accurate. What brought this about? Okay, don't judge me. I was watching a video of Markiplier adoring Lady Dimitrescue. I wholeheartedly agree with him in that video, which would make me feel a little silly if he were only doing a bit, but anyway. I got daydreaming about being my own character there and, naturally, shifted it so that Dimitrescu and her daughters adored me and adopted me like a pet. I feel there's a lot we could look at there. There probably is, but we can do that another time. We'll lump in my experiences reading Carmilla as well. Anyway, I'd forgotten that Resident Evil was not Silent Hill, and that the protagonist of Resident Evil was probably some unhappy person getting dragged into everything, rather than a guilty person going through their own punishment. I figured, well, I'm assigned female at birth, a decent person, unique and funny in my cluelessness. There's no reason these ladies wouldn't adopt me. Going off that fantasy, I had to ask myself what I would do to protect the people these women were encountering. Once I remembered that it wasn't a Silent Hill punishment thing to be there in the first place, I started wondering what I would do about the people brought to the castle. I mean, the ladies have to eat, and as I haven't played the game and only seen clips, I assume they drink blood and eat people. So would I be able to bring them groceries instead? Would I be willing to trade a limb of mine in exchange for someone's freedom? Is it people actually guilty of something that get dragged into this, like Silent Hill? What would I be guilty of? The ladies seem to have this whole thing built into their natures, but could it be changed? And if, in the off chance, someone stumbled into their grasp that I knew was guilty of repeatedly and most likely intentionally harming others, would I still act to keep them safe? Well, Google could solve the questions about the game, but those are some big questions you're asking about yourself. I know, but it's a safe place to ask them. Gotta love fiction. To continue, around the same time I'd been thinking about ex-boyfriend number 2 and feeling more than a little rage and pain for what I endured in that relationship. I was daydreaming about what I would do if number 2 was dragged before Lady Dimitrescue. Interesting. If you're willing to share, I'm willing to listen. I realized I'd actually have to stop and debate over whether or not I'd choose to intervene and advocate for their safety. I wouldn't encourage the ladies to be cruel, that I know, but I'd be torn between multiple options. Such as? Let's take a look at the worst first. I could just tell the ladies to have fun and be quick about it, and my reasoning is this. He hurt me in our relationship from practically the word go. I have no idea if it was intentional or due to self-centered ignorance, but it was repeated over years and done with manipulation and coercion, so it was probably something he was conscious of doing. I do take responsibility for my own lack of boundaries and being desperate to please. I get the feeling someone who was strong in their boundaries and had enough self-respect to put their foot down when things were harming them wouldn't have suffered many of the things I did and probably left the relationship early. And he still harmed me to satisfy himself and serve his own interests. To this day, I have no way of knowing if he's at all reformed, or if this damaging behavior could hurt other people he pretends to love. While I like to imagine a good scare from Lady Dimitrescu and possibly losing a limb could encourage him to reform, there's no guarantee. Especially when 1 in 10 abusive men actually change their ways. So letting the ladies have their lunch may be the best way to remove an abusive person from the world. An interesting solution. But not a great one. I have no way of knowing that he hasn't magically reformed. I've been changed drastically over the last 2 years. Perhaps he's become far less of a bastard in the past 9. Also... Go ahead. What if it all wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been raised to be obedient, convenient, silent, and desperate to please? Like it's my but you were, and it did, and he chose every response and action he made to benefit himself and only himself. Just because someone's wounds and past experiences made them easier to manipulate or harm doesn't make it right to do so. Neither does any harm the perpetrator possibly endured excuse their choices and actions. If you'd been raised differently, he probably still would have tried that crap on you. As you recall, he was pretty invested in only himself, and used at least some of his bullshit on his partners before and after you. Decent guys don't cheat or choose to hurt the people they love. True, I hadn't thought of those aspects. What other outcomes of finding number 2 in the castle did you look at? Possibly not making any decision at all. I would have been tempted to have washed my hands of the entire thing and left it to the ladies, basically condemning him but claiming innocence on my part. My only concern would have been the safety and well-being of the ladies if he got loose and hurt them trying to escape. I wouldn't want to just release him, feeling like he's a potential danger. Even though advocating for the freedom and well-being of all people who have the misfortune to enter that castle would probably be the right thing to do. So you feel like this would be retribution? Maybe. I doubt any court in real life would be interested in holding him accountable for what happened, especially given my lack of opposition during the relationship. I don't think anyone could make him care about what he's done, or admit any responsibility in the harm he did. He'd probably cry, try to manipulate me, and blame everyone else in life for being so hard on him, like he did when I broke up with him. And then he tried to manipulate you back. Very hard. And then he dropped the whole thing when I eventually stood my ground, and he found a new partner within weeks. So coming back to fiction, did you end up making a decision in the end? I did, and don't judge me, it gets weird. As usual for my daydreams, I have magical powers. So I summoned a divine and dark feminine presence and had them judge. Not really taking the decision out of your hands. A dark female entity would probably be more inclined to sacrifice an abusive man to the ladies of Dimitrescue. Oh wow, I hadn't thought of that, and I think you're right. I wasn't exactly fighting fair. And in your relationship, neither was he. Let's keep exploring your fiction. What happened next? She gave me the right to judge, and I decided the risk of his abusive tendencies continuing outweighed the chance of his redemption and the pain it may cause his next of kin for him to vanish, and killed him myself before giving him to the ladies. Whoa, bit dark. Yep. Usually in my daydreams of conflict, I settle on an ending that has me using divine compassion to change everyone's hearts and minds for the highest good of all. And while it's a lovely idea, in reality, it's only possible for people who want to heal, grow, and change. I couldn't see that desire honestly in him, in fiction or reality. Just wanting to save his own skin and keep doing whatever he wanted. So, what does that make me? Human? In this fiction, keyword fiction, you're open to killing someone who very likely poses a threat to others and causes unnecessary suffering for their own gain. There is nothing you could do to ensure their change. I'm going to ask a question, and feel free to say pass. How did you feel in your fiction when you made your choice? Angry. I was furious at what he'd done. You didn't enjoy it? No. There was some satisfaction in knowing the potential danger he posed was now gone, but it couldn't undo what he'd done to me and maybe others. It didn't make me happy. It didn't make him understand or care. What would you do if you saw him in real life? Leave, if at all possible. If not, hope he doesn't recognize me. Do my best to shut him down if he tried to talk to me, and be ready to full-on tell him off for what he did in our relationship in public, even if he tried to wound me in any way, and fight back if it came to it. So no dark sacrifices, no homicide? No. The consequences to myself outweigh removing him from the world. In terms of global abuse, he's a small fish, so it probably wouldn't be worth it. Most people he meets don't have my background, I hope. So he may just be an abusive asshole that can be shut down rather than a deadly threat. I don't know if that's me rationalizing or not. And while I can see myself killing in real life if pressed enough, I don't know if I'd be happy with myself after. It's a pretty momentous thing to take a life. Even he was once a tiny baby that just wanted to be safe, warm, and held. Not anymore, he's not. Though that's a good way to look at it if it helps you remember people's humanity. Not everyone is doing the same. But circling back to all of this, I honestly don't know what to do with this. I got really pulled into all of this reflection and made some serious choices in it. Am I still a good person? From the sounds of it, yes. You've really developed boundaries, and that couldn't have happened without a great deal of self-reflection. Even though your darker fiction has you be your own judge, jury, and executioner, you had done a good deal of reflection and were even willing to take it to a higher court. One I chose that was most likely skewed in my favor. Not a guarantee. If the divine presence had ordered you to let him go, would you? Yes. Without direct harm, and with an explanation of how he'd made me suffer, as well as the assurance that I would ask the divine to watch him. If his behavior did not improve, I'd set the ladies on him. Or I'd ask the divine presence for that before the end of the trial. And if the presence found him entirely innocent and said he could go? I'd still explain how he hurt me, say I wouldn't hurt him, but that he'd better get going before the ladies did. And that they'd find him if he didn't begin honoring the consent and boundaries of his partners, whether the ladies actually could or no. Couldn't hurt to have some incentive to change. So what does all of that make me? Still human. You're not making real-life plans to hurt anyone. You've seen and acknowledged that you have the capacity to harm in fiction, and maybe harm in reality, and that you'd choose not to unless violence is the only way to prevent further harm to yourself and others. So have all of your fictional heroes in your games and books. Like them, you're not making malicious plans. You're here to defend when put in that position and prevent future harm. Naturally, you try through talking first, of course. Also, the fact that you've looked at this is encouraging and suggests you're less of a danger than you think you are. How so? Would you feel more secure talking with someone who could never in a million years imagine defending themselves or others with violence if pressed? Well, some people choose that. Yes, they choose that. They thought, felt, and reflected, and chose the path that resonates with them. Would you feel more comfortable with someone who understands what they could be capable of and chooses what they feel is the most compassionate and responsible path? Or would you feel safer with someone who refuses to consider what they could be capable of and decide to do in a similar situation? I don't know. I'm not sure I would be able to see the distinction. Years ago, I may have chosen non-action, calling it pacifism, when it would really have been me being paralyzed by fear, doubting my own judgment and ability, and not knowing what to do or who to listen to. I might have just let harm happen due to paralysis or lack of ability to think deeply about the events and possible consequences, just being concerned that none of it was seen as my fault. And would the you that you are now feel safer with that person you were, or with someone who took a good look at their own shadows and chose pacifism? Oh, hands down, pacifism. Although, yes? The second response I thought of in this fiction was pacifism, just doing nothing and letting the ladies do what they wanted. And you chose not to, choosing to put the matter before a higher court. You recognized that if number 2 escaped, he could harm the ladies of Dimitrescue or future partners, and that you'd rather not be passive in letting that happen. In this fiction, you weren't willing to passively let him risk harming again, though if the divine commanded, you wouldn't have encouraged his harm. Wouldn't I? I would have encouraged the ladies to rough him up on the way out if they caught up to him. Or maybe just given him a head start before setting Lady Dimitrescue on him. And possibly ask the divine to put some sort of sentence on him to make sure he didn't harm anyone else. So no matter what you chose, you would have been trying to limit the consequences of his freedom to harm others. Yes, which feels a bit unfair, as in this fiction I really face no consequences at all. I guess that's what makes this a power fantasy. And something attractive to people without power to change something that has harmed them in the past. So I'm not secretly a terrible person for following this thought process? Not so long as you keep it to thought experiments and not reality. Did it keep going after number 2's death? Nope, it stopped there. Fair. Did you feel better? A bit. Would you prefer to change the topic and go look at some cute animal videos? Absolutely.